Okay. So this is episode 148 of the Mind Over Finger podcast. Hi, everyone. I hope we find you doing amazingly well today. I'm so excited to have violin soloist Timothy Chooi with us, and I'm really looking forward to dive in with a fellow Canadian and know more about Timothy's journey, his career, and I'm going to have him answer listeners' questions today. So, a lot of fun ahead. And before I turn the mic to him, I want to invite you personally to explore with me what it's like to feel confident in performance. Practicing for a peak performance, my online performance preparation program is now available at mindoverfinger.com. It's your complete toolkit for optimal performance and your roadmap to flow. We're going to cover the three pillars that lead you to playing your best consistently in performance. And through video trainings, detailed worksheets, and online live support, you're going to be guided step by step through the Mind Over Finger peak performance system. So if you feel stuck, if you're frustrated, if you feel like optimal performance and flow state are things that you're never going to get to experience, I want to offer you a new way of thinking about it and also offer you real solutions. So go to mindoverfinger.com and join us inside practicing for peak performance. You're going to know exactly what to do, not only to prepare for the next big event, but to enjoy the whole experience. Practicing for peak performance is your blueprint to optimal performance. And again, that's at mindoverfinger.com. And I'm going to have the links in the show notes. So without further ado, let's talk music making and performance with Timothy Chooi. I'm so excited to finally have him on the show, and I've already spoken enough. So please jump in, Timothy. Thank you so much for being with us and tell us everything about you and your musical journey, how your artistic path has unfolded, and what things look like for you today.
That's a loaded question, but thanks for having me, first of all. Where do I start? Well, my name is Timothy Chooi, and I was born in just outside of Victoria, British Columbia, a couple decades ago. And I was born and raised there until in my teens. And I started music not by accident, but it felt like an accident because my brother is also a violinist. So by the time I was born, he was already playing the violin. And then I was watching PBS at the time, which we were stealing from the US network down in Victoria. And I saw a recording of Sarah Chang playing in the Carmen Fantasy at Wigmore Hall when she was, I think, 8 or 9 years old, something ridiculously young. And then I started to take a pair of chopsticks and I started imitating right away. So that combined with my brother being at home was kind of what catapulted me into the idea and the world of violin playing. So I started Suzuki when I was about 3 years old, and I started with a very, very, very strict, but also very, very generous teacher in the Victoria area. And then I continued to learn, and nothing really serious, honestly. It was just kind of here and there, very much a hobby. Went to school, learned English, learned other languages as well, because my parents are immigrants into Canada. And then when I was about maybe 10 or 11 years old, I started to really see the world in a different lens because YouTube came out around 10 to 11 years old of my time. And then I was suddenly exposed to seeing all these artists that I've only heard online or through PBS in video. So I learned about the Concertgebouw. I learned about Carnegie Hall. I learned about the Musikverein, the Berlin Philharmonica. So just suddenly my whole world of classical music expanded beyond Seattle and Vancouver. For me, that was the world to me. Vancouver and Seattle was the world. So then continuing on, I went and learned a lot from all of these videos. And for better or for worse, I felt like I was copying a lot of their fingerings, a lot of their bowings, but also I'm a very visual learner. So I continued to copycat a little bit. And then finally, my family, we immigrated to the United States of America when I was in my teens. And we continued on there. I got accepted to the Curtis Institute of Music because that was somewhere that my brother was already going to. So I entered there right in the middle of middle school and into high school as well. And I grew up in Pennsylvania and graduated high school there, continued on with my studies in the US, adjusted to a new life in the United States, and then just went onwards and onwards and onwards. There was no break between the ages in my teens until now, honestly, until recently. I went on to Juilliard. I went on to do some competitions in Europe. I went to study in Europe. And then finally, now I started working as a professor at the University of Ottawa. As of July 2021, I'm performing, I'm touring, I'm collaborating with my brother, recording, sharing my insights of how my life unfolded as an artist coming from a smaller, relatively small town into the main art scene of classical music. So this is where I am right now, and currently I'm in Toronto.
And it's amazing because anyone who follows you on social media knows that all these places that you mentioned earlier, Berlin, Music Verein, all these places you've performed in.
Yes, yeah, I'm still slapping myself to this day that I actually played there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And I love what you said about having a strict but generous teacher. And that is something that I see around me so much, people struggling with this relationship we have sometimes with teachers. Can you speak to a little bit more about this generosity aspect of things and how important that was for you?
Absolutely. I think when I meant strict and generous, it's in the most honest way, because for me, I learn best when facts are given to me directly and straightforwardly. And I
Mm.
feel like maybe, as we get more sensitive as human beings, I think that we sometimes don't want to hear the truth.
Mm.
And for me, not saying that you have to blatantly hurt someone because of the truth, but I think there's always a way to deliver a message of honesty, whether that be in learning something and I think we only learn when we're given the truth. And then once the truth is laid out, then we can develop from that. So my teacher, I was very blessed because she was very, very strict. It was very strict that when she gave me an assignment, it had to be completed, and yet generous in the sense that very understanding. So the two for me, I think, gave me a sense of discipline when I was at a very young age.
I love that. Deliver the message with honesty. It's so beautiful. And, it is important to be disciplined when we embark on this journey of having a musical career. But completely agree with you in terms of how there is a way of saying the things that need to be said and hold someone up to a high standard, but in a compassionate and respectful way. I think it's such a great behavior for her to have modeled for you. And that's something that you're going to pass on to your students.
I agree.
I also love what you said about YouTube and how, that really helped expanding your world and how it helped you because you said the word copycat. And one thing that's very interesting is you have a very unique voice. So I think
Oh,
that sometimes we're afraid of imitating because we don't want to copy. But I think that in many ways, it's so great to try things, to explore until we find our own way. And I feel like you've done wonderfully well with this.
I feel like I'm still figuring out my own way, but I'm glad to hear that because as they have a saying, steal like an artist.
Yeah. And it's so true. I mean, I think that the world of the internet is so wonderful in what it allows us to see now and be exposed to.
Yes.
Yeah. I have some listeners' questions, so I want to dive in right away.
Okay.
I have two questions from Chad who wants to know. I thought these applied really well for you. How do you bring the things you've been practicing into the actual performance?
Through practice, I think that's the most obvious answer to begin with. I think you need to practice what you want to deliver on stage. I see so many of my students and even myself that we practice things that we're never going to do on stage. And as basic as it may sound, I think you need to just deliver the ideas in your brain to action and then replicate it and repeat and repeat and repeat. And I think that's just with anything. Even when you speak, you need to constantly rephrase the same that you're saying in a different way. But ultimately, I think it's just prioritizing what you want to get out of the practice room and how are you going to project it on stage.
Mm-hmm. And so many people forget that part that we need to practice it the way that we want it to come across on stage. Chad also wants to know to what degree, I think that's a great question because
Okay.
this concept of sheer repetition of exercises is so many people have so many different ideas. And if people have not caught the last episode, episode 147, I talk about a new way of approaching repetition. So there's so many ways of approaching repetition. And here's Chad question. To what degree does sheer repetition of exercises benefit?
To what degree? Uh, it's not measurable, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, that's asking for data on a very, very feeling based and personal measurement. I would say the more experience you have in delivering the message that you're trying to get across, just naturally by itself, you got to trust that it's going to get better. The different dimensions of repetition, whether that be consistency or whether that be different experiences of playing different settings, I think they will naturally, automatically um, start to package itself in a way that's very easy to deliver. So I think of it as learning a language because I think it's so similar in so many ways. It's the more you practice it, the more errors you make, and the more that you continue to want to improve, the better it naturally is going to get. Because if you constantly make a lot of mistakes and you still go forwards with it, then you're just going to practice all those mistakes. And then you get really good at mistakes. But also you need at the same time to just do it out there. So it's a mindset, I would say. It's more of a mindset than it is the actual repetition itself. So
Yeah,
that's my suggestion is have the right mindset, and what's right or wrong, that's for you to decide. But have that mindset and then practice it. And then it's going to be whatever your mind had delivered it, wanted it to be.
it's very mind over finger.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. I love the title.
I feel that you tell me if you agree with me. People underestimate how many repetitions are needed, but it's exactly what you just said. It's finding out how many repetitions work for you, but also the right kind of repetitions, not just repeating the mistakes, but have what I call is each repetition should bring either improvement or more insight so that there is with each repetition a clear assessment and intention for what the next step is going to be. Yeah, I love everything that you just shared with us.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing that repetition doesn't always mean playing, also. It could
Mm,
also be about it. And I think oftentimes we add that on top of the practice session, which actually does then your 4 hour practice sessions ends up being 8 hours because listening is and thinking and making decisions from score studying or even performance analysis. I think people separate that. And I think that if you include it, then it becomes a much more wholesome way of practicing because just like when you're working out, you can't do biceps every single day. You're going to break down your biceps and it's going to actually be worse. You're going to get injured. But if you rest and then you work on another part of your body, then you're going to start seeing that your biceps are trying to and starting to heal. So the next time you can do it, it becomes stronger.
mm. That's a great point. Yeah. So this idea of listening and thinking about it, absolutely. And yeah, I feel like people want to know exactly the number of repetitions, when and how. And I think that we need to look inward for those answers. What are the right number of repetitions for me? How to do them, when to do them. And that aspect that you're talking about of the listening and thinking, so important. I have another question from Helena. How do you prepare hard repertoire when you are short in time?
You just have to do it. You just put your mind that you can do it. It's really a psychological thing because I would say, I mean, you got to be realistic with what you're also doing. So if someone comes up to you and say, I want you to play Baroque Violin Concerto tomorrow, that's up to you to decide whether you're going to do it or not. But if there is, I've done in situations such as in the Queen Elizabeth competition in 2019, which they give us more or less 5 days to learn a new piece. It's a 25-minute piece, 5 days. We can use the music and whatever. Um, it's possible. It really is possible. And I think at the time, if you plan very, very well and section and consistent and make some sacrifices, it's absolutely doable. Um, it's a psychological thing. You got to trust in yourself in reaching some goals. Um, it's not ideal, and I wouldn't recommend it, but that's how you do it. You start with your mind. You're telling yourself, I can do it. It's just a matter of really being mature and taking the steps to sit down and saying that there are 7 pages. Every day I'm going to do it a page and a half. By the fifth day, I'm going to have everything learned.
Now you're really speaking my language as a life coach. If you, it's a mindset. If you decide you can do it, you figure out how to do it. I have two questions about this. You mentioned make sacrifices. What do you mean by that?
Make sacrifices. If you're going to watch Netflix for half an hour, why not just score study for half an hour? It's these small things. If you're going to wake up late, just wake up an hour earlier and start working on it right away. If you need to skip your friend session to hang out for an hour and then learn it, you can do it. There are a lot of sacrifices, and I think knowing what your priority is important, because let's say someone does come up to you and say, like, I want you to learn this piece in 1 week. Then if that friend time, that Netflix, that opportunity to relax and decompress is vital to you, then you need to also choose your projects. So, you know, it's if you're going to say yes, you got to make sacrifices. If you're going to say no, you got to also make sacrifices.
Really well put. Yes, absolutely. Really well put. I think people are also going to be angry if I don't ask you to unpack that process a little bit. So, learning a piece in 5 days, you were talking about prioritizing and making a plan. Can you unpack that just a little bit more in details?
Sure. So the piece that I learned at Queen Elizabeth was, I think, about 12 pages from what I remember. The first rehearsal was 5 days in, even though we had a week technically before we had to perform it. So, but I made it the worst case scenario, 5 days. So I looked at the score first, and the first day I remember, I just read through the whole thing. I couldn't play everything. I could barely play half of it, I would say, barely the first page. But I took it out of myself. I'm going to spend 4 hours, take breaks, of course, but I'm going to just spend 4 hours. I have to somehow get from page 1 to page 12 in those 4 hours, no matter what. And it's constantly stopping and starting, but also in a tempo, just so there is some sort of familiarity. Because some things are like, oh, wow, this first page was a lot easier than I thought. The things I need to worry about is in the fifth page. Just gives you the geography of the piece, first of all. Some are mountains, some are deserts, some are flat, some are whatever. And then after that, you start to section off. So I remember I wanted to make sure that I had 2 days at the end of it where I could just polish rather than still learning notes. So 12 pages, that means now over 3 days. So that's not terrible. It's 4 pages every day of somewhat having it in my fingers. For me, that means putting fingerings down, bowings, basically having all the information in the music, because I knew from the get-go I was not going to memorize it. And there's no point in trying to memorize it. So that was out the window to begin with. There's no point in memorizing something that you're not going to memorize. So that's another thing that I was talking, don't practice things you're not going to do on stage. So if you're not going to memorize something, why try memorizing it in the practice room? Because it's just a waste of time. So I put every single fingering down, every bowing down. If I change something, immediately change it right away as well, and then practice that. Put a metronome on, because the first basis was just to get a clinical approach of how to play everything. I didn't know what it sounded like either. It was a contemporary piece. And then, you do that first day. First day, you feel like, I did a lot. And then second day, you're like, oh, wow, I had to do another 4 pages of the same thing. But you just do it again. And then third day, you're like, okay, this is the last day. I'm at the 12th page already. Then the fourth day, it's a day where you kind of you glue everything together and you're like, oh, wow, this is not going to go very well. And then fifth day, you're like, okay, let's try it. And then by the time at least you have something in your hands. And then honestly, they're like, I still have another 3 days to work on this. Day 5, day 6, day 7, because you already had a chance to play with orchestra. You're like, okay, I know what's difficult, what's not now. So it is doable, as I said. And that's how I approached it. Very clinical, very, very, very disciplined in my mindset, and also time as well, because I had another concerto to also prepare. I had to prepare my romantic concerto. And gauge your energy as well. It's better to use up all your energy earlier in the week than later, right? It's better to stress upfront than it is to stress near the end. Not always doable, but ideally.
Ideally it's a big land where not a whole lot of us get to spend a lot of time.
Exactly. And that's also why I said, you got to be realistic with what you want to do, what projects you want to take up. Because do you want to really shut everything for the next 7 days to learn that piece? Is it worth it to you? Is it worth it for the product itself? Also, for me, I always knew coming into this competition, it's part of that.
Yeah.
That is what I have to make. But you just got to be realistic, and also 7 days I think is already very very short to learn something. I wouldn't push it any further. So just expect what I mean. Time is a real truth teller.
Mm, well put. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love what you said in terms of this planning. It really looks like it's rooted in self-knowledge of how you learn, how quickly you master information and a skill. And it's very important what you said also in terms of having this, worst case scenario where you learn things very quickly, you kind of have you front load it. And I talk to clients a lot about this tapering out at the end to make sure you have the energy to deliver. So if you really have to be extinguishing fires on the last day, then you have no
Yeah.
juice left for the performance itself. And as you were saying, you also were at the same time preparing a concerto. So this managing of time, energy seems like you've got it down as a science.
Well, that's why I think, I mean, that's not something that I don't think anyone's born with. I think you really have to test it out. So I encourage, that's why most people that are younger, even when you're at an early age of 3, and this is where I go back to my first teacher, there was a lot of expectations. Whether I deliver them or not is a different question. But knowing how much you could be pushed, I think, is knowing that threshold. Because if you never really know your potential, then you never know, can I learn this in 7 days or do I really need 14 days? So knowing what you can deliver and what your mind can also handle. Not everybody's the same. Some people can do it in one day. I know some people that can learn a whole concerto in 2 days. I mean, wow, I wish I had that. And some people can't do less than 2 months. And you can never really know until you've made a mistake. So that's why you should make mistakes when you're in school and when you're younger, because that's the best time to make mistakes. And there's a lot of forgiveness. And it just makes sense at the time to still make a lot of errors at that age.
I love what you're mentioning here in terms of finding out where that zone is of what is the potential and also what is like the minimum threshold as well. Is very important.
Very.
Yes. Tell us a little bit more about this mindset that you're talking about, because for me, I'm right there with you, but I'd love the listeners to know a little bit more about your opinion on this.
I think I've been pushed a lot since I was very young. And I'm not saying that it's in a bad way. I've been always tested to my limits. I think growing up in Victoria or near Victoria was a very unique place, I think, because my family were immigrants and playing the violin in Victoria honestly was cool, but I don't think it was part of the culture. So it pushed my limit of how long could I continue with this passion and hobby in a place that maybe is not New York
Hmm.
or Vancouver, albeit. Um, and I think that already tested my limits of how passionate am I into this field. Second of all was getting used to different cultures because my family culture of my history is very different than English Canada at the time. And then on top of that, I didn't really have a teacher in my preteens. I was self-taught. It was how much can I keep going on? Um, and then on top of that, immigrating to the US. How
Hmm.
much can I adjust my life to this new system? It was very jarring at first. I mean, now I feel very at home in the United States, but um, at first it was a huge difference because the different schooling system, different mindset, different way of how things worked, and trying to also not go to the wrong path. Not getting influenced. And I don't know. For me, it's always been a mindset and just knowing what I want. And it's not easy. I couldn't say I knew what I wanted exactly at the beginning, but I know what I didn't want.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that eventually turned into what I wanted. And I'm still figuring that out to this day. But I still know what I don't want. So I think that kind of is the fuel of what keeps me going. And then that tests you because I had made a lot of mistakes growing up. But all of them looking back, yeah, there's small mistakes. At the time, it felt big. The small mistakes, I mean, I think one of the biggest mistakes I did was I wanted to learn Paganini Concerto um, when I was 11 because I thought it was so cool and I could force myself to do it. At the time, it felt like such a failure to not be able to deliver that. But now looking back, I was like, oh, it's just Paganini Concerto. But every single big move that I made, I think I'm very, very happy to have done it because it really tested my limits. Saying yes to too many concerts, I was like, that was too many, but I could have done, let's say, 9 out of the 10 of them, for example. So that's how I practice my own way of pushing myself. And then also knowing when things are too little. It's like, am I just staying with one piece for 1 year? That's too little for me to be inspired. So, and this is very music focused, but I think this applies to almost everything in life.
There's so much insight to unpack in what you just delivered. Thank you for this.
Of course.
I feel that you have so much wisdom, and it's fascinating to see how having to handle all of these challenges contributes as well to your developing as an artist. So much learning new language, adapting to culture, and this self-knowledge that you seem to have, I feel like is rooted in all of these different situations that you handled.
Oh.
And it's great what you're saying about, this going for that concerto and making mistakes. What's fascinating to me to explore as a concept, as a life coach, is what we make our mistakes mean.
Mm-hmm.
Because up to a certain point, we do what we do and we get
Mm-hmm.
the results that we get out of it. It's what we make it mean that has a continuing impact on what we're going to do in the future. What's fascinating about learning this Paganini first concerto is kind of it showed you where your limits were. And in itself, that's a great thing because think of what came out of finding out what these limits were. So in
Exactly.
itself, it wasn't a mistake.
Yeah, yeah, because it turned into a very, actually, looking back, it became a very subtle lesson. I mean, at the time, it felt like the world ended. As a kid, everything seemed bigger. But now looking back, I was like, ah, it was just Paganini concerto. I just wasn't ready. I just needed a couple more years, and I actually never learned it. But it was just something that I thought that at the time I could prove to other people that I could do it, and then I was like so disappointed because I couldn't even prove myself. Um, yeah,
Nikki, I'd love to, not
it's
Nikki,
okay.
that's your brother,
It is my brother.
Timothy. Sorry for that. Hi to Nikki, by the way.
I will tell him.
I'd love to jump into the rapid fire questions with you, if that's okay, because I'm really excited to hear about what your answers to some of them are going to be. Um, for the people who are dreaming of a career that resemble yours, tell us a little bit about what your life looks like. Because when we look at it on social media, it looks really busy, really exciting. I'd love to hear a little bit about what it is and maybe some of the challenges and some of the rewards from this life that
Mm.
you have right now.
Ooh, social media, that's a whole different conversation we could have. I think, first of all, don't believe what you see on social media. I mean, take it what you will. It is what it is.
Yeah.
It's a snapshot of the best times of that we have on tour. Um, what can they expect in the life that I am going through right now? I think, well, I'm very happy with my life. I love what I'm doing. This is always what I've wanted to do. I'm enjoying being extremely healthy and positive and just full of things to look forward to. And I think that um, it's not an easy path being a musician, no matter how much I think you kind of envision your future. But with hardship also comes great rewards. So I think, you know, it's not an easy path. There's a lot of sacrifices, just like we talked about earlier, whether that be social life, whether that be physical, because you are playing something. There's a lot of disappointment when you're learning a new piece that you've never understood before or never played before. There's going to be a lot of mistakes, and that never really ends. Performing never gets easier. You get more used to it, but it never becomes easier. Um, what else can they expect or what they don't see? What they don't see, I think, is how normal my life is. Because I'm a piece of human as well in this world, right? I go through challenges. I have to get my driver's license renewed sometime, and I can't figure out how to go to the DMV and get that done. I have to go to the doctors. I have to make sure I'm healthy. I do work out. I have to eat very healthy as well. Touring, booking flights. I mean, it's fun when it finally works out, but it can be a hassle as well. And sometimes the thing about being a musician, especially a classical musician, what's very jarring is that you're in a social circle that is extremely knowledgeable and extremely removed from society sometimes. And then you see the other side of the world and you're trying to make sense of what your role is. So I think that's a big question that a lot of artists today are trying to figure out because we live in a bit of a bubble, at least as a classical musician. And I enjoy the bubble, of course, but understanding the purpose of what you're there for and how do you make your life meaningful beyond what people want. And that's a whole different discussion as well, probably.
Absolutely. That's a question that is not in that list that I sent you, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious actually, what are some of the hobbies that you pursue outside of music?
I love airplanes. I love anything to do with aeronauticals. So I love understanding how planes work. I love the engineering of it. I love drawing as well. I am a nerd in every sense. Chemistry, I think I like how things work, and I like to learn about history as well because I think history is it's basically what made us today. So those are my hobbies.
I love to hear about that. As you
Okay.
were talking about earlier, when sometimes we need to make these sacrifices and give up some of, some of our time and energy towards something we're working really hard on, but we also need some time to unwind. You were talking about how it's vital to have this time to relax and, just step away from the work for a little bit. So I was curious to know what that was like for you a little bit.
It's good. I mean, I wish I had more time for that. And it's always a balance from every artist I've known, whether they're a freelancer, whether they're a superstar, whether they're being orchestra musicians. It's always a difficult balance because being a musician and an artist, I think of all arts, dance, theater, whatever. So much of what we do on stage is our identity as well, off stage. So being a musician, being whatever, we put so much of our personal thought and care into our product where I'm not saying that other fields don't have that, but I think just it's whether you be someone an amateur or whatever, it's ingrained since a very young age.
Yes, I totally agree with you.
Yeah,
Sorry, what?
it's hard to detach.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that introspection in finding where the line is for us. Yes. Do you have a favorite tool in the practice room?
My music stand. I say my favorite thing is my music stand because I've been in so many hotels and so many different situations where there's not a music stand, and you can't. It's not just about reading music; it's you can't practice, right? Your whole practice routine becomes compromised,
That's a really good point, actually. Yes. Do you
right?
have
You
one
know
of
what?
those really lightweight ones that they used to sell them only in Japan? Very
Ah,
lightweight.
yeah, I do have one of those. I do. Yeah, I didn't bring it this time, but I do.
You mentioned, mindset and discipline already. Would you say, is discipline the habit that contributed to your success, or maybe is there another one that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Consistency is a huge one. Consistency, which is a part of discipline. Yes. I wouldn't say I've always been the most consistent person, but I always had a force behind me that had kept me accountable. I think family stability, I'm blessed with that. I know not everybody has that luxury to be saying this. And honestly, just I think in some ways the naivety of getting into this field actually helped. It doesn't always help with everybody, but in my case, I would say yes, because I was very comfortable with being who I was
Mm.
in talking to people, in knowing what I want or what I didn't want. And I never had this noise around me where someone's like, you should want this, you shouldn't want that, you want this. So in some ways, I've learned to practice following my gut at a younger age than most people, at least in the industry. Um, so I think that's one thing that I would say um, to answer your question.
I love that. It really shows a great maturity.
Yeah.
How about a piece of advice that maybe was given to you, or any piece of advice in general that you'd like to pass on to the listeners?
Okay, I think the advice that I had when I was younger is so different than now because I feel like now it's just such a different world. And this is me coming in my 20s still saying this to people who are maybe in their teens. I think um, try to think for yourself. I think
Mm.
that's one of the biggest things because it's so easy to just be a sheep now and to follow the herd. And you have all these great social media tools, but they have what's good about it is equally bad about it. It's so easy to be sucked into a world of false reality. And there is nothing, I would say, that beats smart and hard work because I feel like a lot of, and through teaching and also just interacting with even people my age, but even people, that I teach, um, they want results without going through the process.
Mm.
And I think that there is just no easy way. There are always exceptions of people, you know, it's just like winning the lottery. There's always exceptions, but there is nothing that can replace that hard, but also smart work. I say hard and smart because some people work hard, but not smart. So, that doesn't do any good either.
And there's a way to work hard without compromising our integrity or our mental health or physical health. I mean, take anyone who signs up for a marathon.
Yeah, exactly.
Almost nobody I know of is forced to sign up for a marathon. And they work hard and they talk about needing Advil and
Mm-hmm.
stretches. And it's not an easy process, but it's a, let's use the word grind. Yes, it's a grind that is enjoyable for many because of what they learn from going through the training, who they become. And I totally agree with you that the process, there is no shortcut. That's actually something I discussed in one of the podcast episode. I forget the number now, but one of my favorite quote is from Stephen Covey in the book The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he talks about how there are no shortcuts. The process must be followed and the price paid. And I totally agree with that. And I think that people oftentimes um, confuse working hard towards something in the way that is in alignment with who you are and also working hard in the way that is self-destructive. And there's a difference between the two. It seems as though you have found a really great balance in this field.
Well, also learn from other people's mistakes. I think that's a great one.
Absolutely. Um, Finally, what is a quick actionable tip that the listeners could implement today in their musical life?
Think for yourself. Similar to the last question, literally, like think for yourself. Think about what your limits are, and think about what you want out of your musical life. Actually, no, that's not maybe it. Think about what you don't want in your musical life, because I feel like you know better. It's hard to always say what you want. It's easier to know what you don't want, and that automatically puts you closer to what you want. And that always changes. What you want always changes, but what you don't want usually changes as well. I mean, it doesn't change. Sorry, it doesn't change. So, sorry, I'll rephrase this again. Let me say it one more time to the listeners today is to, first of all, think for yourself, but also, second of all, which is very important, know what you don't want, and that'll help you get closer to what you want.
This is fantastic insight. Thank you so much,
Of course.
Timothy. Thank you so much for taking this time to talk with me today. I feel like we can draw so much inspiration for what you shared with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I want to invite the listeners. Actually, what I would love to hear, let's back up for a second, is
Hey.
what is coming up for you?
What is coming up for me? Well, I'm playing a little concert here tonight in Toronto And then next week, I'm going to go to Berlin to rehearse with the Deutsche Symphony Orchestra Berlin. And we're going to tour Liechtenstein and Austria with the Beethoven's violin concerto. So that's coming up. And then I'm going to be teaching at the University of Ottawa again until the end of the semester. And then we're going to be playing Tchaikovsky's violin concerto in Jacksonville, Florida. And then I'm going to spend, the holidays with my parents in the US. And then next season's going to next half of the season will be pretty interesting as well. I'm making my debut at the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic with Brooks Scottish Fantasy, which will
Amazing.
be recorded on BBC and Medici, and then making my debut in Munich and the Musikverein in Vienna, performing there again. So yeah, a lot of exciting projects, a lot of things to organize and stay healthy. That's one of my biggest projects.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible. Living the dream. I'm going to invite the listeners to visit your website at timothychooi.com. And also, a reminder that they can access a transcript of this conversation and more resources on mindful practice and performance preparation at mindoverfinger.com/resources. I'm going to have all these links in the show note. But wow, that looks like an incredible season. We're going to make sure we keep track of where you are in the world. And
Feel
thank you
free to
so
follow
much again.
Feel free to follow me on social media. It's probably the easiest way that I can connect with all of the audiences, and always happy to hear from anybody, whether it's a stupid question or an extremely complicated, smart question. So don't be afraid.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Timothy.
Of course.